With pleasure. My name is Olivier Lafaye. I'm pure French, as you can hear from my accent. But I've been living extensively and working in Asia for the past 35 years. And I've been living both in Singapore and in China in Beijing. And I've been experiencing business throughout the continent in the various countries, and particularly in China, in various activities, in electronics, in security, and in aerospace. I started my professional life in China back to 1994. That means 25 years back. At that time, China was very different from today. There were more bikes than cars, and bikes without electricity, or just human power. It was a completely different picture. Beijing was a very different city. Shanghai was a very different city. And when you go back at that time, people were very different. They were kind of rude. They were not traveling outside of China, a little bit within China, but not much. So it was a completely different China. At that time, this may sound to you very outdated, but the Western world and the Japanese were funding China, were lending money to China to develop itself. Nowadays, China is a country which is in its turn are lending money to the rest of the world. So it's a complete change over one generation, and the gap between China back to 1994 and today is just immense. A few years before 1994, the then Prime Minister Deng Xiaoping decided to quit, in a way, the communist rule, the communist economic rule, but preserving the power of the Communist Party, and to bring China on the world stage. And this started with Shenzhen, the opening up of China. Now there are many Shenzhen all over China, and the new Shenzhen, as it is today, is a new Silicon Valley of China and of the world. So it's a huge, huge distance and difference between the China I knew 25 years back and the one I know today. All right, this is a very classical question, should I say. But first of all, I would like to say that humans are humans. The culture can bring some differentiation, but basically humans are humans. They have the same behaviors, they have the same expectations, they do the same thing when they get up early in the morning, everywhere in the world. Now, the history, the culture, the environment really bring differences. In China, you should never forget this is a country which has a very old history, more than 5,000 years. This is a country of rural people from the land. They are peasants originally. And this has really set up a mindset in China by which it is the relationship with the land, with the earth, is fundamental. And what you need is really to develop and extend your activity together with the land if you want to survive. And this explains why China has been developing itself over the past 25 years because of this very special relationship. In France, we are a bit similar, but our rural rules are getting back and old now. China is less true. There are still maybe 40% of the population which is working in the rural areas, and the rest now is urban. In France, maybe we are 95% urban, so still a big difference. So, but to understand that China is coming from the land is really critical because this generates different behaviors. So what are these kind of behaviors? So it's, first of all, it's a survival behavior. You have to understand that and the political system is something which makes you always a bit unstable, so you're always in a survival mode, and you have to benefit from the status you have today. So this is very important. Business-wise, this would translate into the fact that you will always go further and further and extend what you have. You will never be stopped by any real rules. IP, I don't know. copying is not something abnormal, and it's not immoral. So don't forget that you find statues today which have been made 10 centuries back, which were already copies of statues which were made 5 or 6 centuries before. So this is really in the mindset. So to understand the business mentality means that you have to know a bit of history and background of the social background of the Chinese people. Now the Chinese people, I would say, are, although it is a difficult country, they are people who are very, very pleasant people. And you have to consider that. There is, like everywhere, there's a black face and the white face. And it's a bit the yin and the yang. But it's the same everywhere, but particularly in China. So I would say that if you want to do business in China, deal with the Chinese, you have to understand a very wide area of, or wide scope of behaviors, because the Chinese also have time in mind. Here in the West, our time expectation, our time lifespan is very short, particularly in business. We have to deliver results for our shareholders, for our stakeholders, so our expectations are from 1 to 3 years. In China, no, it goes much beyond that. So the Chinese, when he deals with you, has time in his mindset. He will not be judged for the immediate things he will do with you. What matters is the long term. So if you don't understand that, you will go nowhere. And the next thing is, here we are in an area where we have a very specific relationship with the religion. Here the religion is one God, and we have a transcendental relationship with God. China, God does not exist. Therefore, there is no transcendency. You have, on the contrary, immanence behaviors. That means that you are in a process, and the process always builds itself, and you have to adapt to the process. So there is no beginning, there is no real end. There are steps, and you have to fulfill the steps, but you never know before what will be the steps. So you have to build the steps, and you have to be two to build the steps. But never forget that when you build this relationship, that you have to put yourselves in the shoes of the other, because the Chinese would hate to lose face, to lose, lack of respect, and maybe you can do it because unintentionally, but this may happen. But for a Chinese, if he loses face, this is the end of the story. You will go nowhere with him. So my advice is, always pay attention. Be respectful. Maybe time to time they will be rude or even arrogant. But never mind, this is the name of the game. The only thing, the ultimate thing is keep the relationship, whatever is happening. This is extremely important. And should you do that or not, this will allow you to do or not to do business. Yeah. So there are different stories, and you can read any book. You will find hundreds of cases, of course. My particular experience is in the field of IP, intellectual property. So the Chinese have really understood that in the world today, what matters are really intellectual property norms, because this generates the ultimate power on your industry, or whatever the industry is. So intellectual property and norms. Going back to the early years 2000, 2010, in the field of media electronics, there is one very specific technology called compression. Compression is the fact that you have images, so you need to have more and more images in the less and less possible space, with a very minimal consumption of energy. So this is called compression. So at that time, the dominant countries were basically the Japanese, the French, Americans, not yet the Koreans. What the Chinese decided to do in that case was to set up their own standard for China. Never forget that China is a huge country, a big country, 1.3.4 billion people, 22 times the size of France. It's huge, really huge. So, and this is self-supported, supportive country. It's a continent of itself. It is within its normal boundaries, physical boundaries. So the Chinese would think internally rather than outside. So what they decided to do with this mindset was really to build their own standard. And to do that, they said, okay, you can be part of the Chinese market. You have to abide by the Chinese standard. If you want to abide to the Chinese standard, you have to bring for free, of course, your intellectual property and your assets, and then you will benefit from the Chinese market because you will be part of the standard. But the cost was high. The revenue expectation was extremely low because in China all the prices have to always to go down. This is a critical matter. So by the end of the day, we refused to play that game. The problem today is that the Chinese are nearly the kings in this technology. That even the Silicon Valley has difficulty to follow the Chinese, and in Europe there is almost nobody left. So this is a typical example of how the Chinese, in time, have built a strong power both in technology, in standards, and ultimately in business itself. And this applies to consumer electronics, to now telephony, to many areas. It's a difficult question. Today, the paradigm has changed. For the past 20 years, we have been living under the WTO regulation, which is a multilateral relationship. Now, the tendency is to go to bilateral relationship. The world order has been very much weakened. WTO has almost ceased to exist. So this is obviously a pity, but this is a matter of life. So you have to do with it, whether you like it or not. So you have to study carefully where you want to do your business. Of course, China is a huge market, so you have to know exactly where you can do business, on which niche of the market, and to study the state of the Chinese competition. Bearing in mind that they learn very fast, they have a huge base of engineers and human resources and money. The Chinese banks are lending money. They are well supported by the Chinese central bank and all the organizations. And don't forget that the RMB is not yet an international currency, so you can manipulate the funds in China. So China, we can do business. Luxury goods are selling very well in China. We can still sell Airbus or other goods, so it's still possible. But better to select and choose carefully where you go. Where the Chinese still have to learn are probably the services. They are not that good yet, but growing. So, but there are areas. Innovation, the Chinese are picking up very fast, really very fast. But there are, for some parts, we are still there. So to be innovative and to protect your innovation is key today. And this can fall into all the bilateral treaties which have been signed between China and other countries, or big organizations like EU. So this is my point of view regarding China. Now, if you go to the Asian markets, I think the growing markets, you have different markets. You have mature markets like Japan, like Korea, which are extremely attractive markets. And those things, you can make extremely good money into these countries. They respect intellectual property, they respect the product. Societies are society, so to speak, is sophisticated. So for what we can sell, there are good markets. Then you have the emerging markets, all the Asian markets. So probably the two, three growth areas beyond Singapore are Vietnam, 7% growth, very impressive. And there are a lot of companies which are divesting today from China, moving to Vietnam. You have Indonesia, which is picking up. It's a stable country now. And you have Thailand. So Malaysia in itself is a bit small country, interesting but small. So yeah, I would recommend to look after Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. Plus, there are internal market. Never forget that Thailand is about 60 millions, like France. Vietnam is 100 millions, and Indonesia is 250 or even more. 你好，我是很高兴，再见。